The Fulmin is an amazing primary weapon. Between its silent shotgun mode and deadly accurate rifle mode, it's equipped to handle most of everything in the game. Today, I'm going to show you the best builds you need to make this weapon godly. I'm the Engineer, let's solve a practical problem. For this video I'm going to cover the main build you'll need for most content, a couple mod alterations for specific circumstances, and some min-max builds if you don't mind splashing some extra plat for niche rewards. I'll also run you through suitable riven stats and abilities which complement the Fulmin. First, a quick rundown of the Fulmin's main features. It's a crit-based weapon with modest status chance. It has no ammo, instead using a self-recharging battery that helps you keep going. It has mostly innate electric damage, with a little bit of impact or puncture depending on the firing mode. In semi-automatic mode, it functions as a silent shotgun with infinite body punch through, consuming 10 ammo per shot to cleave through groups of enemies up to mid-range. In automatic mode, it functions as a rapid firing rifle with unlimited range and very high accuracy, but with lower DPS and no punch through. The main use of the Fulmin is the semi-automatic mode, as the automatic one is only if you need to hit something without closing the distance first. The automatic fire can also be useful if you have a reactant buff giving you infinite ammo, just make sure you turn down your volume a bit first. So, preamble aside, let's look at our first build, which is the main one you should use for almost everything. As you can see, the Fulmin is a former heavy weapon. The major builds I've got for you today use 6 V polarities, 1 dash and 1 D polarity. You can theoretically get marginally more DPS out of swapping 1 V for a second dash, and this is swapping out the 60-60 toxin mod for a 90% toxin damage only mod, but that loses both status chance and compatibility with other builds I'm showing you today. With most weapons, there are some simple must-have mods, and the build for the Fulmin is just the same. So Serration, Heavy Caliber, Point Strike, Vital Sense and Split Chamber are all must-have mods for the Fulmin. Terminal Velocity is a huge power increase too, as you substantially increase the range of the Fulmin's semi-automatic mode, allowing you to cover 150% more area and hit more enemies per shot. In the end then, all build variety worth mention on the Fulmin comes down to just the first 3 mods, in this case Malignant Force, Vigilante Armaments and Primed Cryo Rounds. Primed Cryo Rounds is such a powerful mod, nearly twice as much elemental damage as a standard Cryo Rounds, that you need a very good reason to skip it. Paired with Malignant Force, we get a viral output that's very effective against Grineer, solid against Corpus biological units, and good enough against most everything else. If anything survives a hit or two, it's probably now got a viral proc, meaning a third hit will almost certainly kill whatever you're pointing it at, and anyone behind it too. If you don't have Primed Cryo Rounds, Standard is just fine. Primed is better, but it's expensive to obtain. I strongly recommend sticking to using a D4 on this slot and using Cryo Rounds, as at some point you will want to upgrade to the Primed mod. This build is good for just about everything as it is, though there are some circumstances it doesn't hold up. You'll want a different build for the Steel Path against Grineer and Corrupted, Disruption against the Infested, the Index, Cambion Drift, and Eidolon Hunts. For everything else, all you do is just point your Fulmin at the enemies and fire, no aiming needed. As you get used to using the weapon, lining up multiple enemies and headshots will substantially increase your output, making use of the full critical and AoE capabilities of this gun. For those circumstances where this main build doesn't work, we can swap around some of the first 3 mods to compensate for that. For the Steel Path against Grineer or Corrupted enemies, you simply swap out Vigilante Armaments for Hunter Munitions. This simple change adds slash procs to the Fulmin, which chew through armoured enemies. The paper DPS is actually lower, which is why you don't want to use it against unarmoured or lower level enemies. But when the enemies have thousands of points in armour, as with the Steel Path, Hunter Munitions shines. At the low end of the Steel Path, this change effectively doubles your DPS against armoured units. As levels climb, the effect increases yet further. The actual damage numbers won't seem amazing, but you're carving past the target's armour, which makes an incredible difference. For maximum efficiency with this build, you want to be watching for when slash actually procs, and getting a feel for when you've hit the enemy enough times to kill them. By shooting an enemy until you've hit them with slash twice, if that's how much it takes, you can then switch fire to another enemy while the first one bleeds out, ramping up your kill speed. This takes a bit more awareness and thought, but then I did say maximum efficiency, not maximum laziness. For the Cambion Drift, Index, and Infested Disruption missions, the viral damage type isn't suitable. On the Index, it can still work, but swapping to a Radiation and Cold build is vastly more effective, using Thermite rounds, Stormbringer, and Primed Cryo rounds. The reason for this is that the Brokers universally use alloy armour, with their armoured health making up a huge portion of the effective hit points. Radiation carves through this like a hot knife through butter, and cold damage is effective against both their shields and armour, albeit to a lesser extent. With this, you can annihilate the Brokers with minimal effort, and pairs extremely well with Wukong when you equip only the Fulmin. For the Cambion Drift, viral procs are ignored by most Infested, and some are resistant to viral damage too. Likewise in Infested Disruption, the Demolishers ignore viral procs, and a couple are totally immune to viral damage. In both cases, Radiation is also a terrible choice, ruling out the Index build. Instead, you want to utilise Corrosive Cold, with Malignant Force, Stormbringer, and Primed Cryo rounds. This is effective for multiple reasons. Firstly, the stronger Infested are weak to Corrosive, increasing your damage by 75% outright for that type. Second, Corrosive procs will drain the Infested armour on Deimos, which is a pretty big deal, seeing as you cannot use viral procs, and the radiation damage that punch through their armour is resisted by their health. Cold is a neutral damage type against the Infested, but Primed Cryo rounds is still bringing a huge damage increase, so it's worth keeping on regardless. Outside of these, I must caution you that the Fulmin is not a good choice against Eidolons, nor if you're on the Cambion Drift on Steel Path missions. If you have a means to strip armour on the Cambion Drift, then the Fulmin can once again do good work, but on its own it loses too much power to be worthwhile. With Eidolons, there's no rescuing the Fulmin, just use Rubico or the Redeemer. This wraps up the main builds that I'd recommend. However, if you do want to min-max to the fullest, I do have two more options for you. For specifically against high armour targets like the Grineer on the Steel Path, we can make Hunter Munitions just a little bit more effective. Using Hunter Munitions, Vigilante Armaments and Primed Bane of Grineer, we can achieve around 10 to 15% higher effective DPS than with the viral Steel Path build earlier in the video. The upside to this is you're not relying on viral procs to get this high damage output, and are instead making use of how slash procs double dip on Bane mods. The downside is that you need Prime Bane mods. This is the absolute strongest build that you can put on this form as setup for the Fulmin, but of course it's expensive in getting those Bane mods. If you want to take it one final step higher, dial this up to 11, the absolute highest damage build for the Steel Path on the Fulmin, then swaps out Vigilante Armament for Bladed Rounds. This raises the effective DPS another 10 to 15% and gets comparatively stronger the more armour the target has. Sadly, this build has 4 downsides. It's still using Prime Bane mods, which are not cheap. Bladed Rounds requires you to kill an enemy to activate the damage buff, making your damage output unreliable. Bladed Rounds also requires you to be aiming to get the damage buff, making it more cumbersome to use. And lastly, you need a different form of setup to equip all of these mods, making it incompatible with the other builds I've shown you today. So due to these issues, I'd say it's not really worth it to min-max in this way. The potential damage is there, but the litany of issues means realistically, it's not suitable for the majority of players. That said, we all know someone would have a fit in the comments if I didn't show you how to dial it up to 11, so there's that. Riven wise, the Fulmin has a very low disposition, and it's going to stay that way forever, so this does limit your options when it comes to Riven stats. If you get a Fulmin Riven with plus Toxin, it can replace Malignant Force, trading out status chance for whatever other stats you have on the Riven. Or if you get plus multishot, it can replace Vigilante Armaments. Otherwise, it's extremely difficult to get a Riven worth taking off any other mod. Ideal stats for Fulmin Rivens include multishot, critical chance and critical damage, as well as damage to Grineer if you're using it for the Steel Path. Ideal negatives include ammo maximum and reload time, as the Fulmin has no reload pool, as well as minus zoom, minus impact puncture or slash especially, or minus status duration. Projectile speed and status chance can be useful positives, but they shouldn't really be a priority. Again though, without plus toxin or plus multishot, it will be very hard to get a riven to fit into most Fulmin builds. Make sure you check the polarity of the riven you pick up as well to ensure it will fit the former setup you have. And finally, let's talk about supporting extras for the Fulmin. Its crit nature means it benefits highly from Arcane Avenger equipped to your Warframe, and the Vigilante mod set equipped to your Sentinel or Warframe as well. These can seriously increase the damage output you are capable of doing. As for abilities, a fire rate increase is rather effective, such as from Wisp's Haste Mote, though this can also force you to be recharging an awful lot. Rhino's Roar is absolutely amazing for increasing damage, especially on the Hunter Munitions builds due to its impact on slash. Alternatively, you can use energized munitions from the Helmet system to allow you to get more shots in intense firing circumstances, which is a nice quality of life, although it's somewhat overshadowed by stronger ability options. Lastly, while the Fulmin can get past armor using Hunter Munitions, a frame capable of wiping enemy armor out entirely will return the Fulmin to full power, allowing you to use the main build instead. For armor stripping options, check out the armor removal frames video linked at the end and in the description. And that's that folks. The builds that you'll need to make the Fulmin great, and a couple extras if you really want to take it to the max. If you have found this video helpful, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, I strongly suggest you subscribe too. But for now though, shoot hard, clear maps, and fight well, Tenno.